Macmillan Audio presents The Mysterious Mrs. Nixon, The Life and Times of Washington's Most Private First Lady, by Heath Hardage Lee. Read for you by Jane Oppenheimer. This book is dedicated with special thanks and admiration to Pat Nixon's East Wingers, to the Honorable Barbara Hackman Franklin, who worked in the Nixon West Wing and later became the 29th U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and in memory of Helene Colesi Drown, Pat's dearest friend and the one who perhaps knew her best of all. Prologue. The Mysterious Mrs. Nixon. August 9th, 1974. Spotlit under blinding camera lights and accompanied by the sound of thunderous applause, Richard and Pat Nixon, the soon-to-be ex-president and First Lady of the United States, walked wearily toward a raised platform in the East Room of the White House. Following close behind them were the two Nixon daughters, Tricia and Julie, accompanied by their husbands, Edward Cox and David Eisenhower. No one had slept well the night before, knowing what was to come. Pat, a spouse who had always devoted herself to her husband's interests, had been powerless to help him during the Watergate scandal. After facing formal impeachment inquiries from the House of Representatives, President Nixon ultimately chose to resign. Americans, still in shock, would soon watch Nixon's farewell address to his staff on live television. Pat had balked at the idea of having their exit recorded. "Oh, Dick, you can't have it televised," she said. But in the end, she acquiesced to his wishes. On camera, many of Nixon's best-known White House staffers can be seen observing the event as if watching a train wreck. Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, looked nauseated. A young Ben Stein, one of Nixon's speechwriters, later to become a famous comedian, was chewing gum and crying at the same time. Secretary of Defense James R. Schlesinger nervously puffed on his signature pipe, surrounded by swirls of tobacco smoke. Wearing dark sunglasses, the First Lady's social secretary, Lucy Winchester, dabbed her nose discreetly with a handkerchief. Up on the stage, a pale Julie Eisenhower, who had publicly defended her father for months, wore a strained smile. Her sister, Tricia, famously more private than her younger sister, looked anguished. But it was Pat Nixon who appeared the most stricken. She looked painfully thin in her pink, geometric patterned dress with its wide collar and white belt, an outfit that she had worn on a recent trip to the Middle East, her last foreign trip as First Lady. She seemed to be willing herself not to cry, to keep up appearances for just a few hours more. Despite her fine-boned beauty and legendary poise, Pat had always hated being on camera. And yet here she was, America's most private public person, thrust once again into the spotlight. Even after the first family reached the platform, the applause continued. It was perhaps the most painful standing ovation in the history of any presidency. Finally, the clapping subsided, and a tearful Richard Nixon gave a 15-minute farewell speech, in which he praised his adored mother, Hannah, saying, "She will have no books written about her, but she was a saint." He would be criticized ever after for not mentioning Pat. Members of Nixon's own cabinet, including Caspar Weinberger, could not comprehend how he never once made mention of his wife, who had stood by him and supported him throughout the whole ordeal, indeed through his entire career.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?